Bernice was working in Chicago when she met Diego Rivera while she was working on the mural for Rockefeller. And he invited her to come to Mexico. And it was just some sort of an open invitation. And she eventually did go to Mexico. And she was there a couple of times. She went and talked to him. And then she befriended him and Frida. And she became a frequent visitor at their home, which was, of course, visited by many other artists of the time. And she eventually liked Mexico and stayed in Mexico. So you have the majority of her life, or her adult life, is totally spent there, and that's where she lived until she died. And she completely focused her work on photographing the people of Mexico. This period of time in Mexico, what was most important for the nationalist movement and the artists working at the period was the indigenous face of Mexico. And that's what she photographs. So she's very successful in capturing that moment in time. What's really amazing about her photographs is just this clarity of vision and sincerity in her work. The problem with a lot of photographic work of that period and of artists in general that are doing photography is that at some point they become much more important than the photographed subject itself. And what's really amazing about Bernice's work is that she really cared for the people she was taking photographs of. What you can see from Bernice's photographs is that they're very, very conservative, there's a rapport that's established between the photographer and the subject. So you can really see that there's a reaction from the person that's being photographed towards the photographer, towards the lens of the camera. So you know that there wasn't this invasion of anybody's privacy, which I think is really fundamental in her work. So the quality of humanity, the exchange that happens within both sides of the lenses is really striking in her work. Mujeres de Mexico project, the Mexican Women project, was born from her realization that she had amassed such an amount of work of Mexican women, and she decided to just focus on women at that time. There was just this realization that women should be given their due. And so she decided to create the show. And it was the first show of its type in Mexico. And that's what eventually became her first show at the Palace of Fine Art in Mexico City. There's clarity in her intention when she's doing her work. There's what's I think most poignant about it is that there's no fiction in it. There's no intentional doing great art. Another one of her very important projects is the one of the markets. And what's wonderful about that project is that Mexican markets still retain a lot of their pre-Hispanic components. And it's what's wonderful to see in them is how people carry on in at a different speed, at a different time, in a different way of life. So the market still is the center for all of the social life that's going on. Besides the portraits that you can see that are abundant throughout her work, you see the selling of flowers, the selling of baskets, people exchanging goods, people going through a market and looking for things. And she does this as sort of a documentation throughout the country. So you get images that are happening in the state of Veracruz, or in the state of Michoacan, or even in Oaxaca, or towards the Isthmus. And they're images that are absolutely reflective of a very particular way of life. So in some way you could talk about her work as street photography, but without the harshness of street photography. You can see that she would stop, take her time and photograph and take several shots of the same image, but without snapping them and just walking away from the people, which is considered in many places in Mexico and still in other places of the world to be quite rude. She also did a series of photographs of Mexican intellectuals, celebrated writers, authors, teachers, chemists, people mostly from the National University. But you can really see from the photographs that there's a distance between the people she was photographing and herself. And this could be for several reasons, but I think that one of them is because there's this tendency of intellectual elites to distance themselves by posing for the photographer. So some of these photographs have a feeling of being a bit contrived, and that does not happen with the photographs of regular people on the streets. In the case with Frida, we know that Frida is completely her own persona, and she's a show business. The photographs that William Murray did of her in New York are manicured to the highest degree. Her collection of outfits and ribbons and colors and earrings and all sorts of objects really made this magical or mystical person out of Frida. You can really see how she molds herself in front of the camera. And with Bernice's photographs, there's not so much Frida in them. She sort of becomes a person of a normal proportion. So it's a really interesting group of photographs because you see, in some way, a different type of Frida. She's much more modest. And she fits with the rest of the people that Bernice photographed. There's no hijacking by Frida of the whole Kolko project. You can really include a group of Frida's photographs in a show very carefully, and it's a good photography show. It's an excellent photography show, but the show is still a Kolko show. There's also the poignancy of being able to see in Bernice's work not only Frida alive, but it's really striking that she had such an amazing contact with Frida and Diego that that Bernice was able to take photographs of Frida in her deathbed, which is quite an amazing feat. I don't even know if there's other photographs in existence of Frida dead at home. There are some photographs of Frida when she was dead that were taken when the national homage was paid at the Palace of Fine Arts. Those are very important and famous photographs. But the quietness of Frida dead in her bed is quite striking as a contrast to the other group of photographs. In the 1930s, she started self-teaching herself photography, and then she went to work with Koppitz in Vienna. And then after that, she returned to the United States because her family was already living in the United States. And she started working for the American Army as a photographer. At the end of the war, she traveled to Los Angeles to work with Man Ray. After she did work with Man Ray, then she went on to do work with George Weston. Her work was shown in many venues during her lifetime, and that's one of her big achievements, because she was the first photographer, woman photographer, to have a solo show at the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico. That was the Mujeres de Mexico exhibit. She also exhibited at the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico. And after having traveled to the Far East and to Ethiopia and different parts of Europe, her shows also went to many of those venues. So, for example, the Faces of Israel was shown at the Mexican-Israeli Cultural Center in Mexico, and then it also traveled to Israel. So you have a very satisfactory career of her being able to put her shows in all of those venues. This is the first time that Bernice's work will be shown in Poland, as we know that she left with her family when she was very young and she never went back. So we're very excited at the opportunity of showing her work in the country where she was born.